is a lot to think about, a lot to be concerned about. But in terms of the concern about, am I going to transmit it? Am I going to get it? Dr. Aderibigbe, some people have advocated herd immunity as the way to go. Would you please explain to everyone what that is and what your position is relative to that proposition?
Yes, so herd immunity is when you have a medical condition, usually an infection, that affects a critical mass, a proportion of the population, enough that it becomes beneficial. One example I'll use is something like polio, where when you're immune to polio, especially by the vaccine, you shed in the GI tract, you shed polio, and it could actually be beneficial even to the non-immune non-immune members of the community. But you need a critical mass for that to happen. And I think it's been talked about, Dr. Fauci had addressed that, saying right now, even though a lot of people have been affected, you still need a whole lot more. That's where I think the vaccine comes in. Hopefully we'll get that, we'll get the vaccine shortly. And I hope people won't be too scared to get that, because the more people who end up being immune, it ends up being beneficial for the greater good of the community. So that's what herd immunity means. What was the second part of the question?
And what's your position on that? Now, relative to herd immunity, also some countries in Europe actually, propose, those go out there and be exposed to it, and then you become immune in that manner. And some people in this country have also proposed that. Don't worry, everyone get out, whether you have it or not, be exposed to it, and then that way you build immunity. So don't worry about catching it. So that way we build immunity as a nation. What are your thoughts about that approach as opposed to vaccine?
Yeah, one has to be very careful about that. We do know that the fatality or mortality risks are age determined, like you had, presented on your slides. But you still have young people coming down with serious infections. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we're still not sure about the long-term consequences. Even if you don't fall seriously ill in the beginning, a lot of people are saying, there's actually no system that's exempt long-term. Strokes, memory, respiratory things. So exposing yourself would not be a good idea. The introduction of the vaccine is a more controlled way of getting, more people immune. And you've heard about that, and I'm sure some people may even be taking matters in their hands and doing that. I would be extremely careful about exposing yourself in that manner.
At least preliminarily, it doesn't seem to have worked for the European countries that did that relative to their counterparts who seem to have taken other precautionary approaches. Ms. Horn, relative to getting schools ready, we're talking about elementary school, middle school, high school. What is it going to take to really get schools ready to get the children back to school safely? What are the things that need to be put in place in order to get them back to school safely as currently advocated for in-person?
For in-person, I would say there has to be a set sanitation process in place. Having clear guidelines for kids. The hardest part about all of this, and I think may have driven part of the online to be, the choice here in Gwinnett County. I'm not sure, but I am going to speculate based on a lot of teachers and what they've said is they were worried about elementary school students. They're kids, they play with their masks, they don't want to keep them on for long periods of time, they end up on their head, using them as slingshots, all sorts of stuff, because they're just kids. And so I think, they were really worried at that level. And even in middle school, if we're thinking of the maturity of the students, that it was going to be hard to enforce a lot of the necessary guidelines to keep students safe. And also protect the staff as well. And so I think coming back, I agree that there needs to be a vaccine, there needs to be some sort of treatment in place so that when people do get sick, we can make sure that they're getting their treatment, and the risk for them to, die from this disease is a lot lower. Just kind of piggybacking on your question about the herd immunity, I think when we have a set treatment in place, I think that is when it'll be safer. But as far as schools go, there just has to be clear guidelines. And we threw out a lot of different ideas. There was talk of going to swipe systems for kids entering their lunch numbers so they don't have to touch the pen pad. So having different technologies in place and putting those into all of the schools, I think logistics is a hard thing right now. Just in these 5-6 months, we're not as prepared. A lot of schools around the nation just weren't as prepared to have to streamline all of these different technologies to make this possible. And so, like I said, the sanitation process, having those technologies in place, the social distancing guidelines, logistically, classrooms just aren't set up with the capability to be able to socially distance 30, 35 students in a classroom. And when you talk about Gwinnett County, when we have as many students as we do, we're one of the largest counties. We have, some of the largest high schools in Georgia. It's really hard to implement those guidelines. Not saying it's not possible, but the classroom space can be an issue. I know at Parkview, we just built a whole new wing to be able to accommodate the amount of students that we have coming. We have over 3,200 students enrolled right now. And so it's really, like I said, just logistically, it's hard to accommodate all those guidelines. So thinking about coming back, we would have to get really creative. I could see us using our lunchroom, which is very big. I could see us using the gyms, just different ideas maybe to figure out how we can socially distance students until the CDC, until our healthcare professionals tell us that it is okay for us to come back.
Even with all the guidelines in place, do you see students complying? What percentage of compliance do you expect to see?
Oh gosh, that's so hard. I think it really just depends on their age. I think high school students would be a lot better, even though, they still don't fully understand and they want to be able to talk to their friends. I think for elementary school students and middle school students, it might be a little bit harder for them to really grasp because they're in their world at the moment. Sometimes kids sometimes can be more egocentric in what's going on in their world, and it's hard for them to step outside of the bigger picture. When they're in elementary and middle school, high school, they really start to get that awareness. So I think it would be easier for high school students. I think our elementary schools and our middle schools will have a lot harder time to enforce those things. It would be a constant battle.
Okay. Professor Akinyemi?
Yes.
Unlike frontline personnel such as Dr. Aderibigbe, who have an ethical duty to care for patients with the virus despite personal dangers involved, how do we make a moral argument that teachers have an obligation to be in the classroom when they're at elevated risk, such as those who are older, especially?
Yeah, that's a tough one because teachers get into this profession because they're passionate about it, right? Because they want to contribute to the lives of their students. So not being in the classroom is not the first option that teachers choose. But the circumstance is such that you have to put your profession and your life, and decide, which one am I willing to risk for what right here, right? especially when we are getting conflicting information from our politicians, vis-a-vis the scientists, and you're not sure if decisions are being made based on politics or based on science. So you as a teacher, therefore, you're in a situation where you have to make a choice, and you may not even have that choice, right? Also, we have to remember that one size is not going to fit all. For example, at the University System of Georgia, and specifically at Kennesaw, where I work, we have three options right now. The first option that is being encouraged for everyone is face-to-face, right? And then you have the option of doing a hybrid. And then, of course, fully online. But in order to do fully online, you have to have some medical certification, some letter from your doctor that you fit into these categories that can be exempted. There's that list that we have at KSU. So you essentially have to make your case that you have some underlying conditions that prevent you from teaching face-to-face. So yeah, and a lot of teachers, especially at the university level, are in that risk category, 50 and above, right? So you're in there. And if you're teaching online, there are some challenges. If you're teaching face-to-face, as Ms. Horn just mentioned, how do you ensure that you have proper distancing in the classroom, right? How do you ensure that you can make the students put their mask on, although it's being required? And once they leave your classroom and they go on with their everyday life, you don't know what they're doing with their friends. Are they in the bar enjoying themselves? Are they getting together? So it's very challenging. So you've got the ethical issue, but you also have the professional obligation. What do you choose? How do you make a decision? It's a tough one.
It is a tough one, and even for parents at that. So Dr. Fuller, parents are they're weighing two things, the risk of the educational risk versus the health risk and the mental health risk as well. What would you tell parents? What advice would you give them?
Well, several of the, I see children as well, adults, young adults, geriatrics. Several of the mothers, the patient's mother, they said, well, Dr. Fuller, what should I do? And there are several who have already made the decision prior to asking me. They wanted to hear my opinion. And it's based on, and I think communication is very, very important. Communicating the facts, communicating the plan, addressing apprehension, anxiety of the parents as well as the children, especially older children. That's a concern, it's a big concern. The other thing which is important is that when they make the decision, and if there is someone who has a comorbid illness and they do get sick or ill, then there's a substantial amount of guilt that parent would endure. So you have to look at the dynamics, and each person, I hate to say this, but it's the truth, each person is different. If you, and I've read different plans, hallways one way and stairwells one way, and, glass surrounding and eating in you're at your desk. But again, the bottom line is, what if, we know the statistics, we know the facts, but what if that occurs? How is the mental health plan needs to be established. I've had the opportunity to train chaplains doing this and some other people who would address this, and it has to be established in the school systems. And if this occurs, and the communication needs to be very open and ask these questions. There needs to be question and answer sessions. There needs to be protocols established with respect to letting parents know. Communication, I believe, is one of the major pieces here for the parents, students, and the schools.
Very well. I think the situation is further compounded by the fact that there's no unified voice where this is concerned. And this all boils down to the fact that this is a political year. It's an election year. So you have so many contradictions. Who would have thought that the issue of masks is so controversial? Right here where I am in Georgia, there's a major battle with masks going on. Some cities have mandated, the mayors mandate masks. The governor has decided to ban the mask mandate. So you have that political battle going on. You have in other states where the citizens are saying it's satanic to put on masks. So there's so much going on, and there's no unified voice, and so people are confused. They don't really know the seriousness of the coronavirus, or the disease itself.